Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins, joined as always by Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B. Scott. We've got a lot to talk about on this week's podcast. Got a fun one in store for you guys. We're going to talk a little bit about Victor Oladipo, his decision to not play but still travel with the Pacers to Orlando. And we're also going to get into what was a big weekend of racing at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the Brickyard, along with the GMR Grand Prix for the IndyCar series.
And Pennzoil 150. Don't forget about that.
True, the Pennzoil 150. So a lot going on at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway this past weekend. And then we're going to talk, we've got some special stuff we're going to talk about at the end of the next three podcasts. We're going to do, we didn't really get a chance to do a lot of stuff, at the end of 2019, start of 2020, as far as like all decade stuff is concerned. So this week we're going to do the NFL all decade team. And then next week when we do the NBA or the MLB preview, or 2 weeks from now, when we do the MLB preview, we'll do the MLB all decade team. And then we'll finish it off at the end of July with the NBA all-decade team. So really excited to get into some of that stuff. But yeah, B. Scott, it was you know what? Even though we still have no sports, the sporting news is picking up quite a bit, and I'm excited to get into some of this stuff. Although I can say I'm now 100% just kind of off of the whole basketball thing now. I was really excited. I'm still excited for the thing overall, but now I'm significantly less excited.
Yeah, same here. And you know what? I love how we're going to start doing this all decade stuff. As someone that works in social media, this is definitely a big go-to right now of when you're trying to figure out content and with no new news or nothing going on really, going with the naming your all decade teams. That's a great go-to right there. It's a good old trick you pull out of your hat when you need something, and it works.
We didn't get a chance. We had a chance to, but at the end of the year, at the end of 2019, we were doing a bunch of stuff with the bowl games, and then right around the time, we had stuff to talk about all up until we didn't have things to talk about anymore. And right. So now we've been afforded the opportunity to get into that, and what a perfect time. Then, hey, we're officially starting the new decade of sports, albeit off to a peculiar start. But definitely interesting to get into that. And I'm excited because I've got some names that you probably would expect on mine, but also some ones that you might not expect, because I tried not to focus super hard on stats, but we'll get to that here a little bit later. Let's go ahead and start off with the Indiana Pacers. So last week we talked about the Pacers. We talked about the bubble. We got really excited about what the Pacers could possibly do. We thought about, hey, could they possibly, go 500? Could they possibly, secure the 5 seed? How could they possibly advance? We were talking about what they could do once the playoff picture rolled around, and they're still going to make the playoffs because they're locked in. They can't do anything. They can't be any worse than the 6th seed. But last week, Victor Oladipo comes out and says that while he will still travel with the team to Orlando, he is elected not to play. It's for out of fear of re-injuring himself, re-injuring his quad. He's got 1 year left on his 21, where he'll make $21 million. That's next season, which, of course, all the people on social media either are saying that, hey, he's going to leave, so the heck with him. Some people are saying, well, we'll trade him. We're better without him anyway, which is 100% absurd. But I will say this. We talk a lot about the Orlando bubble. My bubble is effectively burst. I was super excited to watch the Pacers possibly not only, have some good games towards the end of the regular season for 2019-2020, but also get an opportunity to get into the playoffs and possibly win at least one. I don't know that they would have advanced past, the first or second round, but I was definitely excited to watch, playoff basketball with, my favorite team ready to go. And now, while they'll still be in the playoffs, it's going to look more like last year's playoffs where they got bounced pretty early on. And so I'm significantly less excited. I'm not as bummed that they're not going to be on TV possibly for us to watch them, although it will be something to watch if they do find a way to like stream it somewhere or something like that. But yeah, I mean it stinks overall. But I'll like as much hate as I've seen Oladipo get. With I've heard people go as far as to say Paul George 2.0, which is absurd to me. Just because. For one, he's still on the team next year. He's due to make $21 million. And while he's been sensational for the Indiana Pacers, I mean, is he really going to go anywhere else and be the guy? And that's not selling him short. That's just saying I don't know if he goes to a bigger market where, that's as well run. Because, I mean, yes, he could technically go to the Knicks, and that's technically a bigger market. But, like, is he really going to go somewhere else that's not only a big market, but where he's going to be the guy? Remember, he's been on, a playoff contender before in Oklahoma City. He's been, a slight, I don't know if you would call Orlando a bigger market as far as when he was on the Magic, but he definitely,
I think Orlando falls under the
I
small market.
I would say maybe a better like destination, maybe a place that's like looked on maybe a little bit better. I don't know.
Well, Florida, any team in Florida is always considered a better destination because of the no income tax down there.
So I don't know, I mean, I'm just saying like I don't know that he can go somewhere else and be the guy. And also like I mean, this season, is not the season to be, harping on guys that don't play because obviously there's health risks that go beyond even if you were healthy, going into the end of the season. I mean, excuse me. I'm dying. Okay. Even if you were healthy, I mean, this is the season that I think everybody gets a pass. I mean, we've seen, Major League Baseball players opt out as well already. We've seen, other NBA players opt out. I mean, this is the year where there's, obvious health concerns. You're going to be away from your family, that kind of thing. So, I mean, and I get that he's obviously taking some of that, risk by still going down there. But I don't know. I mean, this
year. He's not worried about COVID. He's not worried about COVID.
But at the same time, there's in this crazy weird end of the season, I can understand the logic behind not wanting to play, not wanting to get re-injured, and just start fresh next year if there is, and remember, I mean, they're going to start back up again only a few, months after the season ends anyway. So, I mean, I'm not super worried about him going anywhere or Paul George 2.0. I mean, it makes me sad, but I'm not, worried about him going somewhere else or not wanting to be an Indiana Pacer anymore, is I guess what I'm getting to.
Listen, this has nothing to do with potentially re-injuring his quad or whatever it is. This has nothing to do with that. This is essentially his version of a holdout. This is his opportunity to have a holdout and wanting a new contract. And, I mean, obviously he's not coming out right out and saying it, but we all know that the contract talks between him and the Pacers have fallen flat. They're not going anywhere. Neither party is close to an agreement. So, hey, why not? Why not just sit it out? You're not willing to pay me guarantee me a future beyond one more season. Well, when you need me the most, I'm gonna sit out. I'm not gonna play. If it was, I mean, obviously we know it's not about COVID. If he was worried about COVID, he wouldn't even be going into Orlando.
Has he signed anything? Has he signed anything as a Pacer? Like, is he, no. Or is he still? No. Yeah. So I mean, I can understand the argument.
On the contract that we got him on from OKC.
Right. So essentially, I mean, I don't know what the track record is for the Pacers as far as signing guys while they're still in contract, because that you still have some teams that are pretty, big sticklers on we don't negotiate a contract while one's currently going on. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. But
obviously, they're not a big stickler on that because they are in negotiations. They are right. The two parties are in conversation about an extension. They're not even looking to resign. They're just looking to extend which is,
Right.
you know, but it's, I can see when it comes to looking at an extension now, I can see why the Pacers are hesitant. One, he hasn't played much since the injury, and he hasn't played up to the way he has played in the past since the injury. And you look back on his career, he's had that 1.5 good years with the Pacers, essentially. And you don't know what his form is really going to look like beyond if he's ever going to get back to the way he was before the injury. And two, right now you don't know what the salary cap situation is going to look like moving forward. Right now there's a lot of talk that it's not going to go up for next season, if it goes up at all. I mean, it may go up a little bit, but maybe not even at all. So that's going to be a big hindrance, because you got to start looking before you even consider Oladipo. You got to start looking at, okay, what are we going to do with Sabonis and Turner? Obviously, right now you want to lean more towards Sabonis, but overall, I am concerned that Victor Oladipo believes he is a bigger superstar than he truly is, and is going to try to get like a Kawhi Leonard type contract when he's nowhere near that, or a Russell Westbrook contract when he's nowhere near that yet. I mean, just because you've had one good season doesn't automatically put you in that stratosphere. You need to play consistently like that. Show that you're back to that type of form. I mean, I get not wanting to risk yourself for 8 games and, well, really, let's be honest, 12 games, because at minimum, so that I understand that, but overall, just, I don't know, this does make me a little bit concerned, I suppose, about his future with Indiana. Especially, I mean, we had this conversation last week about the whole Paul George debacle. And if the Pacers truly aren't willing, I mean, they've shown a little bit more, I guess, ever since we've had that conversation, I've looked back on it, and they've shown a little bit more good faith than you want to believe, because, I mean, my goodness, they traded the farm essentially draft-wise for Malcolm Brogdon, and, then they signed him to a good contract. So, I mean, that right there shows you. I mean, is he like a Kyrie? No, but I think he might be he's a more sound player, a more reliable and a more consistent player than Kyrie. I think if they can convince Oladipo to return, and everybody gets healthy, I think this is a Pacers team that could have a future big three on their hands if they focus on Brogdon, Oladipo, and Sabonis. But I have a feeling it's going to be hard to convince Oladipo to come back on a contract that's basically, isn't in the level that he is viewing himself as. But, I mean, he's not there yet. He's not to that level. And I'm afraid that's what's going to ultimately end up having the Pacers lose out on him, and then him go to some team that is desperate for a superstar, a team like the New York Knicks that's like, hey, we got a lot of money and we don't have anybody, come be our guy. And he takes this is my house over to New York, and all of a sudden New York becomes his house. And, I could see that eventually happening, and that's unfortunate for both parties, to be honest.
Yeah, and I mean, and like I said before when we talked about it last week, I mean, that's what the whole Oladipo scenario is how you'll know if the whole Paul George thing was true, where they don't want to be more than just a small market team. They don't want to be, they don't want to be burdened with having to sign all these big name guys. And so, and I guess that'll kind of come through in the negotiations, because I also, don't have a problem with the Pacers missing out on Oladipo if he's asking for way too much, and B, I don't blame Oladipo for wanting to go out and, get that bread. I mean, that's not, anything that I think, a lot of times, like, people think you have to be one or the other. You either have to be anti-Oladipo, anti-player, or you have to be, anti the team and anti-owner and that kind of thing. And I think obviously, it's kind of how I felt, in other contract negotiations. Like if a player is asking for something that's going to potentially, push the team back and not allow the team to be successful, then because they're wrapped up in one giant contract, then absolutely fine. Let's look at the whole team as a whole. Now, if they were just being cheap and didn't want to have to resign them for more than, if they're only going to, take them from maybe 21 mil to 23.5 mil, then yeah, we probably get a little bit more of our answer to the Paul George question. But at the same time, if he's wanting, and I'm not saying he's asking this, but let's say he's like, hey, I want to be paid like James Harden and Russell Westbrook. Well, then obviously you're not going to be paid like that. And obviously that's why those teams that have those guys are, wrapped up and can't really sign too many other guys, that are of substance. So
yeah, but those are still the guys that are contending for a title year in and year out.
Right. But that's because those two guys and Westbrook and Harden, that's really all that you need. If you take Harden and Westbrook off the Rockets and put Oladipo on the Rockets and paid him what you would pay Harden, you would still not make it. Like Oladipo by himself is not going to carry a team by itself to an NBA, Eastern Conference Finals, NBA Finals, whatever. It's gonna take other people. Like James Harden by himself can take a team to the Western Conference Finals. Russell Westbrook on his own can take a team to the Western Conference.
So that's
Finals.
why I'm saying Oladipo is not there yet for that.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. If he's asking for that money to be paid like one of those guys, which, like I said, I'm not saying he is. I mean, he could be like, hey, I want 25 mil, and that's reasonable. If the Pacers aren't going to give it to him, then by all means, go make it somewhere else. But yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm
asking for superstar max contract money, no, he's not getting it. I don't think he even gets that from the New York Knicks, to be honest.
Yeah,
he's not a big enough name to market for the Knicks.
Yeah, and I mean,
had one All-Star berth, one All-Star.
The only thing that might scare me a little bit is that if there's something, if like Oladipo's, willingness to sign whatever contract the Pacers might be offering him is contingent on if they bring anybody else into the fold. I don't know who else they could bring in.
I don't think they really – honestly, they just need cohesion at this point. This is a team that's good. And if they really wanted to bring more people in, like another name or something, you got to use Miles Turner as trade bait. You're going to get good value for Miles Turner. So you don't have to worry. I mean, his contract then basically flip-flops with somebody else's, and it works out well.
Right. I'm just saying,
I think the Pacers need to make that move first before to show Oladipo, hey, look, we're working the roster and the best we can to get the right pieces in place. We just need everybody to, I mean, heck, this year alone, if Oladipo was healthy and playing back up to the way he was playing, this was a team that had an opportunity. I mean, TJ Warren is a really good player. Malcolm Brogdon at the point when he's healthy is a really good player. Heck, the Pacers are a much, much better team when Brogdon's on the court compared to when he's not. Jeremy Lamb is a great sixth man right off the bench. Domas Sabonis is slowly becoming one of the best big men in the game. Miles Turner doesn't truly fit what the Pacers are doing, but is a solid, really good young big man who can shoot it from the outside and has, some pretty good defensive presence on the inside with blocking shots. So if everybody was just healthy and had time to play together, this would be one of the best teams in the East, in my opinion. But it's tough because you're like, man, they're still middle of the pack. Well, they're middle of the pack because nobody has stayed healthy. All your best players aren't healthy all at the same time.
Right. So let's say the Pacers trade Miles Turner to try to appease Oladipo, and then Oladipo, I guess two-part question. Are you okay with the Pacers trading Turner not knowing if Oladipo will come back? And if you lose both Oladipo and Turner, are you okay with basically a team? Like, do you feel any worse off having a team that's Brogdon and Sabonis?
Well, when you trade Turner, you're either going to trade Turner for draft picks, or you're going to trade Turner for an NBA caliber player that's already playing. So a player along the lines of like salary wise that matches up pretty well, and working with a team that has the need and everything. A team like, let's say you traded, I don't know, Miles Turner to the Boston Celtics for Gordon Hayward. I'd be okay going forward with Brogdon, Hayward, Sabonis, TJ Warren, Jeremy Lamb. I'd be okay with those guys, to be honest. And because then, remember, you're freeing up. I mean, Victor Oladipo has a pretty big contract right now as it is. I mean, it's a fairly large contract. And so if he decides to go somewhere else, all of a sudden, all that money that you currently have wrapped up in him right now is open, and you can go out and try to get yourself a player that's the same market value of Victor Oladipo. So there is, I think the biggest piece, if the Pacers really truly want to contend moving forward in the future with or without Victor Oladipo, no matter what, the biggest piece that needs to be moved to really move the team forward, in my opinion, is Miles Turner. And nothing against Miles Turner. It's not like he's holding the team back, but two of your best players play the same position and they don't work together on the court at the same time. That's an issue. So, yeah, you need to move.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, you see it in like baseball and stuff when like your best prospect, you have Francisco Lindor as your shortstop and your best prospect is a shortstop. Like, that's obviously not going to work out. You know, it's just like all like the Cubs have had outfield prospects for forever. Soler, you know, all these guys, and eventually they just have to be like, look, where are we going to, you know, Eloy Jimenez, where are we going to put you? So they have to trade him. So it makes sense for sure. But yeah, I mean, I guess all things considered, you know, going back to the original topic, like I'm not concerned. I'm not concerned that Oladipo's now. If there's other like more writing on the walls, you know, as time goes on, because I guess I also look at it from a standpoint of he's still traveling with the team, so obviously he could also, if he was really trying to stick it to him and voice his displeasure, he could also not go.
Right. And so I mean, it is. I don't know. It's all like, how do you feel about it? How do you feel about it, Shirley? I mean, I don't know. To be honest, it's I at this point, even I think here in a couple of weeks we're going to be saying, okay, Victor Oladipo's not playing. No big deal, because guess what? Nobody else is. That's the way I feel like this is all going to end up being here in a few weeks, anyways, where the NBA bubble is not even going to get to have its chance to take off.
Well, one thing we do feel good about is the Anchor app. The Crash Course Podcast is brought to you by Anchor. Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to start? Look no further than Anchor.fm. Anchor allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or mobile device, and will distribute it to other sites such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. If you're on a budget, not only is Anchor completely free of charge, but will allow you to make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Anchor, it's everything you need in a podcast in one place. So, you know, yeah, I mean, who knows what's going to happen as far as the bubble's concerned. Obviously, you know, there's still a lot of things that have to go. Like people are excited that sports are coming back, but I think I'm only going to be excited once they actually are playing, as opposed to this like kind of holdover waiting period as it's, you know, early July and it's at the end of July. So if we get through this month and everything starts back up, then I'll start to be happy and believe again. But who knows? Because even then, after they start up, it could always be shut back down.
But hey, speaking of sports that are currently in session,
yes,
there is one that has finally been hit by COVID-19, and that is NASCAR, which, along with IndyCar, took over the Indianapolis Motor Speedway this past weekend. Obviously, the big headline once the weekend got kicked off was that Jimmy Johnson in the number 48 Hendrick Motorsport Chevrolet tested positive for COVID-19. So that was the first NASCAR driver to have a positive test. Obviously, they took all the necessary precautions. He was never at the track, never around any other drivers. It was basically him and his wife that came down with it. And, nice NASCAR checked in on him through Zoom, and they did everybody did an interview, and everything went on without a hitch. But hey, this past weekend was an amazing weekend at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Oh, yeah, it definitely was. It was the center of the racing world. I mean, you had the GMR Grand Prix on Saturday, on the 4th of July. It was a fun race. I mean, it wasn't necessarily. I mean, it was not the greatest race of all time, but it was still a fun race. It was an exciting race.
It's what we've come to expect from the IndyCar Grand Prix.
Right.
Let's be honest.
You had Will Power start on the pole. He led 28 of 80 laps, including the first 17. Power, Scott Dixon, and Graham Rahal traded the lead in the middle stages of the race. His pit strategies played out. One of the big things was that Scott Dixon, he was, the tires he was on to start the race were really good, and he was working his way through the field. So that everybody believed it was going to be a two-stop race, and then the fact that, everybody was kind of scrambling to get on the same tires that Dixon was. And so that kind of jumbled up the pit strategy a little bit. So that was interesting. They just had one caution for 4 laps. And then the guy that has just been the man ever since we talked about him on our, if you could make up an Indy 500 squad, who would you have? And, we threw Scott Dixon's name into the mix. He wins yet again, just like he did at Texas. He led 26 laps, including the final 18. You had Rahal, Simon Pagenaud, who you picked to win, get on the podium. Colton Herta and Rinus VeeKay rounded out the top 5. It's the first time since 2010. It's the first time in a decade the same driver won the first 2 races of the season. I looked that up because I was like, oh, would it be interesting to go and see if whoever did that won the title? They did not, because it was Will Power back in 2010. So, but still a crazy race. Scott Dixon ends up getting the win, which was awesome. So I'm excited to see what plays out, because isn't he tied for most championships all time? So if he wins this year, or no, maybe he's not. Isn't it 5? Because he's got 5 titles, right? I thought
he's got 5. He wanted to become a 6th time.
Right.
6 times.
But is 6 the record though?
I'm not sure.
Because I thought I heard that stat by Foyt, so someone can correct me if I'm wrong. That Foyt has 5 as well, and there was some Foyt-related stat, and I thought it was championships. But go on, B. Scott.
But hey, it was the first time since the start of the IndyCar Grand Prix that a driver not named Will Power or Simon Pagenaud has won the race. So that's pretty exciting. But Scott Dixon had finished runner-up the last 3 seasons, the last 3 years at that race. So he was due his, especially after last year's where Pagenaud ran him down in the rain and passed him in the last lap and a half. So he was due his. But it was good to see Pagenaud end up on the podium, considering he had a rough qualifying, qualified 20th. And then his car early on just was not having it. So they really worked their pitch strategy and got some things figured out. And they managed to pull together a top 3. That, again, after the Texas race, I had mentioned, I feel like Simon Pagenaud is putting together a championship caliber season. I mean, obviously he is, but I mean, compared to Scott Dixon, who looks like he could just run away with the championship at this point. But the 2 best drivers this season have been Dixon and Pagenaud. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think that one of the biggest factors for why the race wasn't so racy, I guess, is that a term? Racy, is the fact that it was just so hot.
Yeah. And,
IMS just never has the best surface when it's so freaking hot. However, we were proven wrong. I was proven wrong a little bit by, man, you can't really pass when it's that hot. When the Xfinity cars came out an hour later and just put on an absolute show. I have never seen that good of racing on that road course ever. I mean, that was probably the most entertaining race of the entire weekend. Just the last 10 laps alone, just the top 4 or 5 guys battling it out the way they were. I mean, that was entertaining to the maximum. I was edge of your seat racing right there, and I loved every bit of it. That was the highlight of the entire weekend for me, and I don't think I would typically have thought going into the weekend. I don't think I would have thought that.
Yeah, and what's crazy too is that we'll get to it a little bit later, but that kind of makes you wonder how successful the Cup drivers could be as well on the road course. And speaking of the Cup guys, they took over on Sunday with the Brickyard 400. Joey Logano was on the pole. They did not actually have qualifying, but he did start first. There was multiple delays. I was telling you, B. Scott, off the air that I think Penske should make NBC pay for the lights to go around the course because even when I was still going to the Brickyard, I feel like NBC and TNT always wanted to start the race at like 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like, guys, what are we doing? And that I don't know if that was before, like even before the whole daylight savings time, gave you the extra light as well. So, a little bit crazy, but there was, because when you have things like this, like a 55-minute lightning delay at the start of the race, and then a scary moment on pit road on lap 15, where there was a multi-car pileup on pit road that pinned one of Ryan Blaney's team up against Ryan Blaney's car. So that was pretty scary. Although he was all smiles. He was taken off on a stretcher, so that was good to see. But a very scary moment for sure. I had left the room and then came back, and they just showed an ambulance sitting beside a couple cars on pit road. I was like, what the heck happened? And then I saw the replay. I was like, oh my gosh. So luckily, he got away, with not super crazy injuries.
Did they say what it was, if he was injured at all? Because when you look at that replay, his leg looked pretty gnarly.
Yeah.
His left leg looked like it was bent in a different direction, at least his ankle.
I haven't seen. I never got like word
when he was crawling away or pushing himself away. It looked like he had his left leg up, and he was using his right leg to push himself behind Ryan Blaney's car out of the way. But if you looked closely at that replay, man, that foot looked like it was twisted around sideways. And so I thought, man, that's a compound fracture, dislocated ankle. I mean, we've seen a lot of that stuff in the NBA, and in the NFL. That's kind of what it looked like to me. So
yeah, I never got word what the specific injury was, but I mean, obviously it could have been a lot worse. So
it did look like when they were loading him into the ambulance, they had one of those air casts on around his left leg. So obviously there was something. It wasn't just some bumps and bruises and scrapes. He's fine though.
Yeah,
no life-threatening injuries, but he's going to be on some crutches for a while.
Just walk it off. It's fine. As far as the stages go, William Byron won stage 1. Kevin Harvick won stage 2. And then kind of the big highlight towards the end of the race was that you had, Denny Hamlin really dominated the late stages, and that was your pick to win, B. Scott. It was basically your pick to win, Denny Hamlin. My pick to win in Kevin Harvick. They were duking it out. And I honestly was pulling for Hamlin because he's never won at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway before. So I thought that might be a cool thing, even though I'm not a super big Denny Hamlin fan. And then I guess, the forces at B must have heard that, like, I was kind of slightly pulling for him. And they're like, crash kiss of death. And so he ends up.
It's your fault, Craig.
It is my fault. I'll take 100% of the blame. But what did he do? He cut a tire, right? Is that what happened? And that's why something.
He blew a tire.
Yeah, he blew a tire, hits the wall. So he is done with 7 laps to go while he was leading. Harvick takes over the lead and never relinquishes it. He led 68 of 168 laps en route to the win. It's his 3rd Brickyard 400 win. So sneakily, coming up on, the Jeff Gordons of the world and the Elios of the world who have won multiple times at,
Well, he's already tied Elio.
Right, true.
So sneaking up on the Rick Mears
and those kind of and those guys there. So, but a great race. I actually was very entertained at the Brickyard. I mean, one of the reasons why I've kind of strayed away from NASCAR, you've heard me talk about it on the podcast before. I've kind of strayed away from the sport. I'm not as big of a fan as I was maybe back in the day. And I, haven't been to the Brickyard since I believe like 2011 or 2012. It's been a minute since I've been there because the racing had gotten really stale and really bad. And you saw it and reflected in the attendance. But this year, obviously, it was different circumstances and that kind of thing. But I honestly, watching this race this year, I was very entertained with what I saw from the NASCAR guys. I know I've been watching a lot more NASCAR because you're kind of forced to. If you're a sports fan at all, you're kind of like, well, the only thing going on, if I don't want to watch, a UFC fight, is NASCAR or IndyCar. So I'm going to go ahead and watch those races. But I had them on Sunday, and I was genuinely entertained. I think this was a great weekend for both sports to get themselves out there. Maybe pull some fans from IndyCar to NASCAR and vice versa. So I think it was a cool weekend to showcase basically both sports, and I was really pleased with what I saw. Now, it's one of those things where like I watched that race and I had with NASCAR, and I found kind of renewed faith with like, hey, maybe if they do get lights, maybe if they do something else to kind of shake it up, maybe it's like that one ingredient. If they finally have the ingredient down as far as the sport itself, getting a little bit more entertaining, maybe that one final ingredient is lights or the road course or something like that. So, I'm excited to see where the Brickyard can go because I think that was a really fun race. And then, it was exciting to see the IndyCars back at Indianapolis again. So it was a fun weekend. I thought it was really cool. And I think that it's something that can be successful in the future. We'll get more into that here in a little bit. But I think overall, the weekend was a lot of fun. I think it was a successful weekend to have both series at the track.
Yeah, it was a good weekend. I think what made the Brickyard so exciting was the multiple cautions, because the only time you actually saw real racing going on was on the restarts. And if somebody was you saw the guys figure out, I'm sitting in third or fourth place down the back straightaway. I can do this slingshot maneuver and get myself slingshot up into the lead. And you saw that being used multiple times. But once they got stretched out, once you got through that first or second lap from the restart, there was no passing. There maybe have been, it was just very little passing. And if you had the lead, you checked out. You just ultimately checked out. That has been an issue year after year after year recently at the Brickyard, and that is what is keeping fans from wanting to watch it more or be in the stands for it. And I think there does need to be a change, especially after what we saw in the Xfinity race. I think it would be wise of the Cup Series to look to a move to the road course. If they still want to run the oval, fine. If they want to try to do two races at IMS, one on the oval and one on the road course, I'd be okay with that as well, But I think it's time for us to now see these cars on the road course, especially after the show we saw the Xfinity Series put on. That was the best racing that happened all weekend, was in the Xfinity Series. So I think it is time now to move the Cup cars over to the road course, whether that becomes the Brickyard, or if you have the Brickyard 400 and you bring the Cup cars back later for a road course race, which I could see Roger Penske pushing for as well.
Yeah, I think.
And since he's wanting to bring in these 24-hour endurance races, and he's definitely going to put lights in. Let's be honest. He's going to put lights in because he wants to have these 24-hour endurance races. Those are on the road course. So there's not only going to be lights around the oval, there's going to be lights on the road course. You really want to have some novelty? Let's bring the Cup cars in for a night race on the road course.
I'm definitely down for that. I think that would be really fun. And because, that kind of leads us into the final thing about, that we really want to get into with, this weekend is, should you have more doubleheader weekends? I don't know how that would work, in the future. With the road course, you couldn't have it at the same time. And like we were talking before the show, Scott, I think there's a few, IndyCar purists that wouldn't want to see like the Brickyard be moved to May, so you could have, the same type of weekend, like you did this year and in future years. But I think, as far as growing both sports and the popularity of both events, like I don't know if maybe the three races at Indy, the 2 road course and the one, obviously the Indy 500 is going to be maybe something they do in the future, but I could definitely be on board with that. Maybe, 2 races on the road course and one of them is the same weekend as the Brickyard, so you have the same exact thing happen every year. I think that would be a great thing for the sport. And yeah, I mean, lights around the road course would be incredible. And I mean, and I think at minimum that would be something that would definitely improve the Brickyard, is if you had, the Brickyard at night, and then, turn around and, at a different date had the road course, whether that was also at night, or whether that was during the day. I think those would be kind of the best of both worlds, to have 2 races. I don't know what race you kick off the circuit for NASCAR. I mean, I'm sure there is one, don't get me wrong, but I don't know necessarily, what track, you'd be willing to bump off for a second race at Indy, especially with the attendance being like it is for the Brickyard. So I think it'd have to be something where you're not getting rid of the Brickyard, so maybe trying the Brickyard with lights and seeing how that attracts people, or maybe saying, hey, look, we did, or having the Xfinity race with fans. So being like, hey, when we did the Xfinity race on the road course, it drew this amount of fans, so we could probably try it out for NASCAR. It'd be something.
Yeah, but the thing is, Xfinity never draws the same amount of fans.
Right, anyway. but I'm saying, so like
that'd be a tough comparison.
But I'm saying, like, obviously, like, there was no one in the stands for for the Xfinity race when it was on the oval before. So I mean, if you see, a spike in attendance, and the race has good ratings or better ratings than a normal race, then you kind of know, okay, so the rating, because you can make that analysis. You can go, okay, the NASCAR race draws this amount of fans and this rating on a typical weekend. The Xfinity race draws this amount of fans and this rating, on a given weekend. But on the road course, the Xfinity guys drew this and this from a rating and attendance standpoint. So we might be able to see the same exact bump for NASCAR, is what I'm trying to get at.
I don't even think you have to look at ratings and attendance and all that.
But I'm saying too, if you're gonna, because you're not getting rid of the Brickyard though. That's the
thing. Know you're not getting rid of the Brickyard. Here's the best way to go about it. Keep the Brickyard July 4th whenever you want it. Okay. Let the Xfinity guys run on the oval as well. And then I have a feeling IndyCar is going to want to keep that second, or basically the third IMS race, like they're going to have this year in October, when they have the Indy Corn 250, whatever it is. I don't know. I forget what it is. The corn fuel something. The road course race in October.
But is that during the playoff though for NASCAR?
So.
Well, but you're not adding You're not adding.
Okay, let's take one of the races away from Michigan.
I don't even know if they race twice in Michigan still.
Or Chicagoland, or Kansas, or you're always at these same 5 tracks, it seems like, every other week. Take one of those away and throw in the road course at Indy in October and have IndyCar, Xfinity, and NASCAR all running on the road course in the same weekend. It can be done because, look, when IndyCar runs when they run the Grand Prix, typically in May, it has IndyCar, Indy Lights, Pro Mazda, and I think there's one other series. There's like 3 or 4 total series running on the same day for that on the road course. And a matter of fact, they get the Indy Lights and the Pro Mazda series. They get 2 races plus qualifying for both races and practices as well. So it can be done. I mean, and just think about the TV ratings that they'll get for that type of thing. NBC had some of the best ratings this past weekend that they've had in a very long time for racing, because people were all over watching the sport. So it was good. It was really, really, really good for NBC. It was good for the track. I think it is time, though. I mean, you don't need to look at all the stats and everything. Just you can look at the performance on the track. The blind eye could have told, the non-race fan could have sat back and said, okay, Why aren't they all racing on the road course? I mean, and I don't know. Here we are. We're a bunch of nobodies with our opinions, but hopefully NASCAR and Roger Penske all saw something this past weekend and they go, there is something we're missing out on right there. That we need that. That's the type of racing we need to get the fans back in the seats for NASCAR.
And
for the Cup cars.
Could you potentially, because I'd be okay with it, because I think the thing is the Brickyard, the way it was originally formed, because when the Brickyard first started, the racing was better, and there was no road course because the road course was put in for F1. Mm-hmm. So, which I just thought of. I was like, isn't it interesting that the same chicane that F1 wanted, IndyCar to put in, or for Indianapolis to put in, is the one that is in the road course now. The reason why F1 left in the first place, but that's a completely different story. But anyway, but could you? I mean, when the Brickyard was originally thought of, those were kind of the things. It was a better race. NASCAR was more popular, and there was no road course. So
it was also a different style car too at that point.
True, but could you potentially just put the Brickyard on the road course?
No, I have no problem with that.
Yeah,
there is
because the thing for, I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep interrupting you, but like the thing with me is like the Brickyard is, you still want to race at Indy, you still want to have a Brickyard, but I think that's completely solved by just flat putting it on the road course, because you're not. I don't know if you're adding a second date. That's what I was trying to get at before, is that you're not taking the Brickyard away. If you're like, hey, we're doing a race on the oval, or we're having a Brickyard, you're not taking that off the schedule at all. Like you're leaving the race still on the schedule no matter what. So the only way is to either keep it on the oval and have a second race, which, that's a whole other logistic thing. And like, that's why I brought in the stats, because I think with as poorly as the Brickyard does, you can't really justify, hey, that race that used to be a super big draw and was super prestigious that now doesn't draw anything. Well, we wanted to do a second race there. I think that'd be awesome around a road course, which in the past, before this weekend, road course racing, or at least my take on NASCAR road course racing was, those are more boring races typically on the circuit. Or at least that was my experience when I was a fan. I didn't like watching the race at Sears Point. I didn't like watching the race at Watkins Glen, because I thought those were more boring than the races that were, on at Talladega and Daytona and all those, the bigger tracks.
Yeah, compared to Talladega and Daytona,
right. That's what I'm saying. So, like, excuse me. So I'm just saying from a standpoint of, hey, you're not going to create a whole other weekend. So, hey, I mean, I don't know. Is it like 1.5 miles or 2.5 miles or whatever the road course is? I was like, you could still have the Brickyard. You could just have it on the road course instead. And doing that and putting it at night, I mean, heck, that would be almost the perfect scenario.
I mean, hey, the winner of the Xfinity race, Chase Briscoe, was just as excited about winning at IMS on the road course as he would have been on the oval. He grew up coming to IMS, watching, the Indy 500 and everything like that. So he was just super excited that he got to win at IMS. He got to kiss the bricks at IMS. He climbed the fence at IMS. That's all that ended up being mattering. It wasn't that he ran on the oval or ran on the road course. I would be totally fine if they wanted to try the Brickyard on the road course, to be honest, because something has to change, because the racing just isn't as exciting beyond the restarts. And if you don't have, the nice thing about Indy is that it does wear on the tires. So you're going to have wrecks because tires are going to get blown out. But if you have a race that's pretty clean, all of a sudden you get in a green flag pit stop and it's just the leader on parade, essentially. And that's a shame, because like you said, when it first started, heck, it wasn't even just when it first started. It was well into the 2000s where it was really, really good racing. And you want to see something, because you want to see the fans come back for it.
Yeah,
and I think the road course, having it on the road course, the number of fans that you have in the stands for the Brickyard now would pretty much look really good confined to the road course. And too, I think it's just it would be so much more exciting racing. I think, I don't know. I mean, didn't we see Jeff Gordon set the road course record when he swapped cars one point with Juan Pablo Montoya, and Montoya was in an F1. It was a long time ago. I think he set the track record unofficially. It wasn't, an official timing, but in an F1 car, and I think he did it again in the 24 car as well. But we now know that a stock car can run on that road course and put on a good show. So NASCAR, it's your move.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you for sure. Before we get into the NFL All-Decade Team, as we kind of wrap up here, we'll go ahead and remind you that you can follow us at Crash Course FM on Twitter. You can like us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. And then we also have a YouTube channel, which a quick announcement here. This will be the final podcast that will be premiered live on our Facebook page. We're actually going to start we'll post the link still on our Facebook page, but we're going to start premiering it live on YouTube. So if you haven't had a chance to yet, go over to the YouTube channel and subscribe, turn notifications on, and that way you'll never miss a premiere live of the video version of the podcast. And also if you have, any, if you, with what you're about to hear with the All-Decade Team, if you have any differences of opinion there, I want to weigh in on Victor Oladipo or the races this weekend at the Brickyard or the future of the Brickyard, feel free to hit us up, anchor.fm. That's where we are, anchor.fm/crash course, and you can hear us wherever podcasts can be heard: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, the whole 9 yards. So speaking of yards, let's get into the NFL All-Decade Team. So we're going to just, I put a spot for, we've got one quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end. We did offensive line, defensive line, linebackers. We did every single position. We're putting it together an All-Decade Team. Like I said before, we didn't really get an opportunity to do this at the end of the year. So because these leagues are all getting ready to start back up again, we thought it would be fun, or hopefully start back up again. We thought it would be fun to go through the All-Decade Team. So I'll go ahead. I'll do my offense first, and B. Scott, you give your offense. I'll give my defense. You give your defense. And special teams, we'll lump them together. So firstly, with my offense, the All-Decade Team, it's going to start out with quarterback Tom Brady. So the way I went about this was I went with the stats, I went with titles, and I went with, what they, I hate this word when we're talking about draft stuff, but intangibles. So what kind of, maybe what he meant to the sport, maybe what he meant, his demeanor, that kind of stuff. And so I went with Tom Brady as quarterback. I mean, it's tough as much as you might want to say, oh, well, it's this guy, it's that guy. I mean, the dude won Super Bowls. I mean, I know that a lot of the, more impressive Super Bowls may have happened, in the decade previous, but he had the stats to back it up. He's won 6 Super Bowls. I know it's not all been in one decade, but he won, I think, he won 3 in the last decade and then 3 more this past decade. So, I mean, he's got the titles to back it up. I don't think anybody else is close to him as far as, titles, at least in recent memory. And then you've got, like I said, the stats to back it up. And then, I mean, there's people that have never watched a football game in their life that know who Tom Brady is. And so, I mean, it's hard to, kind of argue with that kind of recognition. So Tom Brady's, at the top of the stat charts and a lot of different stats. He may not be number 1 in all of them, but he's up there. He's got the titles to back it up. He's got the bravado to back it up. Tom Brady, the All-Decade quarterback for me. Running back wise for me, this is part of my inclusion of, basically making up an actual team instead of going like, this is the best running back, this is the best wide receiver. That way we had an actual, team around everything. And so because I did one kind of more based on stats and one based more on, yes, maybe a little bit of the heart, but also, more or less to that kind of notoriety and like off the field stuff. And so for me, running back number 1 is Adrian Peterson. I mean, the dude just absolutely is a monster. not only because one thing I looked for too is longevity. How long, did he play in the decade? Because if he had a fantastic, like 2011 to 2014 and, had an amazing, stats that way, I mean, sure, maybe. But, I mean, Adrian Peterson started back, in 2008, 2009, has just been not only somebody who has been in the league a long time and who has been able to be successful in a position that's almost been, rendered obsolete, or at least had been until the last couple of years. He's been productive. He's been, he's on the top of the stats, just like I said with Tom Brady. So he's another guy that's, got the stats to back it up. Yeah, he's never won a Super Bowl, but at the same time, he's just been, an incredible athlete. He's been able to, yes, he's had a few injuries here and there that have kept him out for, seasons, but he's been able to still bounce back from those injuries. Any one of those injuries. I mean, we've seen flash in the pan guys like your Chris Johnsons, kind of flare up and then kind of go by the wayside. Adrian Peterson's been there the whole time. Running back number 2 for me is Frank Gore. And that's just because the dude's been an absolute workhorse. He's at the top of the stats, and he's made it work and been productive in a lot of different environments. I mean, he weathered the storm, with San Francisco through their kind of more darker years, and they got better for a time. And so he, stayed successful there. And then he went to the Indianapolis Colts in a situation where that was supposed to be putting together, this amazing team, and that ended up falling through. But he was, even at an older age as a veteran, he was still pulling that Colts team together. Then he goes to the Dolphins. I think he was even I don't know if he was on the Bills at all, but basically he's been on a bunch of different
Bills last season.
Yeah, he's been on a bunch of different teams and been productive for those teams, kind of like Adrian Peterson, where he's got the stats to back it up, and then he just goes wherever he goes, he performs, and he performs at a high level. So for me, I could not put my guy Frank Gore on there. He's been absolutely amazing. Wide receivers, I went with Antonio Brown. Again, at the top of most every single statistical category when it comes to, receiving touchdowns, receiving yards. He's been virtually unstoppable. I mean, say what you want about what happened in the last, 12 months or so, but, on the field, he's been amazing. He he started out more as kind of, an underrated kind of punt returner, and then he just gradually became this, unstoppable force of an athlete. So he's a wide receiver for me. Then I've got Larry Fitzgerald, and not only because he's got good stats to back it up, but because you could probably put him on the all-decade. This is probably a second consecutive all-decade team if you were to throw him on there, because he's just been around so much. I want to see Larry Fitzgerald win a Super Bowl. I hope this happens. I don't know if it will. But the man has just, I mean, again, it's kind of like with Frank Gore. No matter what the situation has been for Larry Fitzgerald, he has produced. So whether it's been with Carson Palmer and Kurt Warner, he's been amazing. Whether it's been with Kevin Cobb, he's been amazing. So he's been through all these different things. I can't think of the kid's name that came out of UCLA that was the starting quarterback 2 years ago. But yeah, he's been through different quarterback changes and still been amazing. Because he could easily be on two. I think he's played in. No, he's just played in the 2 decades. But he was basically worthy of being on 2 all-decade teams. So that's why I put him on there. Easy choice for tight end. It's Rob Gronkowski. There's a couple other tight ends you could go with. You could go with Jimmy Graham, but he kind of had a life comes at you fast moment. He was at the top of the one of the top tight ends in the league. And then kind of once he got away from New Orleans, things kind of went downhill pretty fast. As far as, being one of the best tight ends. I mean, he's still productive, but definitely not where he once was. And then you could also, there's a couple other guys you could go with. You could maybe go with Antonio Gates. You could maybe go with, but I mean, you talk about a tight end who's changed the position and kind of transcended the position. It's Rob Gronkowski. Again, it's kind of the same with Tom Brady. You could go to someone who's never watched football a day in their life, and they're going to know who Gronk is. Subtle.
Watch The Masked Singer.
Exactly. The fact that he made the top 9 is still crazy to me, but that's the different story for a different day. And then as far as offensive line goes, for me, it's Joe Thomas, Michael Yonda, Marquise Pouncey, Zach Martin, and Tyron Smith. The main one I want to talk about is Joe Thomas, who, again, you talk about he's productive, longevity, and has been, again, one of the more known offensive linemen, if you want to get into that as well. So he's been super productive. Other guys that I chose on that list, mainly because, they've been to a lot of Pro Bowls and things like that. So that's my offensive all-decade team. So you got Tom Brady, Adrian Peterson, Frank Gore, Antonio Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, Gronk, Joe Thomas, Michael Yonda, Marquise Pouncey, Zach Martin, and Tyron Smith. All guys, like I said, that have not only, some of them have won championships, not all of them, but have been very productive at their positions and just kind of also transcended their positions and been very successful that way as well.
All right, so for my offense, it's hard not to pick Tom Brady just because of the amount of Super Bowls that he's won, but I'm going to go with Drew Brees at quarterback, mostly because Drew Brees has put together record-breaking performances. Tom Brady is he's won a lot of Super Bowls, and he's guided his teams to those Super Bowls, but Drew Brees has put up outstanding numbers and been on the doorstep of the Super Bowl a couple different times. So, yeah, I'm going with Drew Brees there. My running backs, I do have Adrian Peterson as well. Adrian is come on. He's one of the few non-quarterbacks that have won MVP. That's pretty impressive. The second one, this is kind of a different pick, but Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah.
Listen, just go with me here. When Marshawn Lynch goes full-on beast mode, there's not many teams that can truly stop him. I mean, in 2014, he set the record for the most broken tackles in a single season. When he is on, he's on. And, yeah, he's had some ups and downs and everything, but when you look at from the time that he was really playing year after year after year after year, he was arguably one of the best, if not the best, running back in the league. His time in Seattle was just outstanding. I mean, obviously, we always point back to the Super Bowl, the Seahawks versus the Patriots. If they would just have given the ball to Marshawn Lynch, the Seahawks would have won another Super Bowl. So, I mean, that's how much he meant to that team. My wide receivers, I went with Julio Jones and Antonio Brown. Mostly because Larry Fitzgerald, he's been good, but when you look at Julio Jones and Antonio Brown, they've been that much better. And nothing against Larry Fitzgerald. It's just, Larry Fitzgerald is a solid wide receiver. Year after year after year, you know what you're going to get from him. But Julio Jones and Antonio Brown were just dominant wide receivers. And, Julio Jones, he was pretty much the offense at one point for Atlanta when they made that Super Bowl run. And then Antonio Brown, I mean, there's not much more you can say about him than what you've already said. And I just love his story and coming up from a MAC program and everything as well. Tight end, it is Rob Gronkowski. He's the most dominant tight end that we've ever seen. Another name you could look at would have been Travis Kelce, but man,
I think the case could be made more for this next decade, like the 2020s. Like, yeah. I still don't think Kelce.
I don't think we've seen the best of Travis Kelce quite yet.
I think Travis Kelce and George Kittle are going to be to this decade what like Antonio Gates and Rob Gronkowski were to last decade.
Right. So yeah, but it's definitely Rob Gronkowski. My offensive line, Joe Thomas. I mean, Joe Thomas is going to be he's going to be a Hall of Famer. let's just be honest. He's a Hall of Famer. You don't have to say much about that. He's a surefire. So left tackle, Joe Thomas. Left guard, Evan Mathis. Center, this is where I kind of went back and forth. I know everybody loves Marquise Pouncey, but for me, I ended up going with Travis Frederick. His career was cut short due to illness. But this guy just was, I don't know, he was just, think of like a Jeff Saturday. type player. This guy just really commanded his line. I think he really was the driving force behind the Cowboys having any legitimate offense, because he could see things that Dak Prescott didn't see or any other quarterbacks saw. And he was just a smart football player. The other guy I looked at closely was Chris Mack. He's a guy that's bounced around a couple teams. He's been paid as the top center, but I think just Travis Frederick, just the way he commanded that entire line, makes him the best center. Right guard, Marshall Yanda. And then at right tackle, I have Lane Johnson.
All right, as far as defense is concerned, first with defensive tackle. So for me, Aaron Donald, easy choice for me. He's one of the best defensive tackles in the league. Just a sensational athlete for the LA Rams. He really pulled that defensive line together during that Super Bowl run. And has been, one of the top guys as far as sacks go and that kind of thing. So easy choice for Aaron Donald. And then it was tough for me with defensive tackles because pretty much everybody defensive that I looked into was not a defensive tackle. So it's tough to find another one that's really great. But Geno Atkins was one that popped out for me just because one of the things that's been good for the Bengals over the one good thing that's been good for the Bengals over the last few years has been their defense. And he's been one of the anchors of that defensive line. He's, came into the league early 2010s and has been, productive, even through, some of the darker years for the Cincinnati Bengals. So he's there for me. Defensive end, easy choices for me. J.J. Watt and Von Miller. J.J. Watt, again, again, you look for kind of the triple threat. He's a guy that is super well recognized. So I know that's not the most important thing, but he's a super recognizable face for the league. He's at the top of the list when it comes to sacks. He doesn't maybe have he doesn't have any titles, but I mean he's a guy who has really been key. He's kind of the guy that helped get the Texans that extra step, got the Texans kind of on the map. Because I mean they had Mario Williams back in the day when they were first, kind of getting things going in Houston. But J.J. Watt, I think, helped put that team on the map and made them maybe, he would be the face of that franchise. If you were to, Deshaun Watson maybe at one point, but he's the face of the franchise for the Texans for sure. And then Von Miller just completely, carried that Denver defense, during that Super Bowl run that they made, and has been super, productive, super, super versatile, and has really been, a big key there. Actually, no. So Von Miller's on my linebacker too. So I gotta come up with another linebacker real quick. I know Von has been like a hybrid as far as being on the defensive line and linebacker. So that's a little bit of a foobar by me, but. We'll keep him in mind.
That's okay. If the All-American teams in college can say Rondell, they can create a position called flex, just to fit Rondell Moore into their All-American teams. You can do whatever you got to do.
So for linebacker, we'll sub Von Miller, who I have on here twice, out for Khalil Mack. What I tried to do was, Khalil Mack's only been in the league since 2014. So I was like, he was only there for half the decade, but he completely changed that defense for Oakland. He's been a tremendous force for the Bears. I know they haven't really done much with him, but he immediately changed kind of the culture and the landscape for Chicago when he went over there. So we'll throw him in there. And then has there been any linebacker that's been more, kind of more, recognizable, more successful as far as like in recent memory. When you think of a successful linebacker in the NFL, I think you think of Luke Kuechly. He's a guy that has really been tremendous for that Panthers defense, and unfortunately, concussions kind of ran him out of the league, I think, a little bit too soon. And then I went Bobby Wagner. He's the first of I went with 4 Seattle Seahawks on this because I mean if you were to go back, I know there's been some good defenses throughout the 2010s. But when you think of each kind of decade has had their, their crazy good defense. I know technically the 2000s had two with the Buccaneers and the Ravens. But the 2013, 2014, whatever, the year that was with the Seattle Seahawks was just incredible. So I've got 4 Seahawks on here. And so that's Super Bowl MVP Bobby Wagner. Cornerbacks, I've got Richard Sherman. Richard Sherman, again, kind of like, Larry Fitzgerald, has not only, played a long time, but has also been super productive. Has been good for, the Seahawks throughout his career, was good the couple of years he's played with the 49ers. So definitely on the list for me. And then Patrick Peterson has been, a big force on that defense for the Arizona Cardinals as well. So I went with him at corner. And then safeties. So I won't lie, I consulted a few lists for safeties. I went with Earl Thomas because he's at the top of the chart statistically in a lot of different categories. So I went with him. He was on that great Seahawks defense. He was on the top of the list statistically for the decade. So that was an easy choice for me. But there wasn't really a guy I wanted to go with second on the list. The Hall of Fame throws out, they did a list. They threw out Eric Berry, which, but I think there's been guys that have been a little bit better. Eric Weddle was kind of a guy I was like, well, yeah, he's statistically good and he's kind of been around, but I don't know. Eric Weddle wasn't doing it for me. So I threw in one of my personal favorites. These last 3 names are going to just be, my favorite players that played these positions. Cam Chancellor. I loved watching Cam Chancellor play. He's had some of the most electrifying plays during those playoff runs for the Seattle Seahawks. So for me, a tremendous force on that defense as well. So I went Cam Chancellor. So that's my defense. Aaron Donald, Geno Atkins, J.J. Watt, Von Miller, Khalil Mack, Luke Kuechly, Bobby Wagner, Patrick Peterson, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, and Cam Chancellor. And then as far as special teams go, this is completely 1,000% just complete bias, but it's special teams, so who cares? Fight me on it. Kicker, Adam Vinatieri, as you can probably guess. Punter, Pat McAfee, without a doubt. Those 2 guys, are incredible. And Adam Vinatieri has the stats to back it up, and then Pat McAfee's Pat McAfee. So, not only, again, one of those guys who not only has the stats, but can, not only talks the talk, but can back it up as well. So, Adam Vinatieri and Pat McAfee on special teams for me.
All right, so I'm going to start off with my interior defensive line as well, and hang with me here on this one. First one is Aaron Donald. Come on. Yeah, we're not even going to go into that one. The second one, this is one you're going to have to stick with me on, J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt he began his career and played significant volume of snaps inside on the interior defensive line before he transitioned to the edge. J.J. Watt was essentially Aaron Donald before Aaron Donald came along. And so I'm going to have J.J. Watt because I have to fit J.J. Watt in there. He's just been that good at different positions. And he's one of those players that can bump inside and also bump outside, and he's dominant in both places. So then at the edge, I have Von Miller. That one speaks for itself as well. He doesn't play at the same volume and the same level that he used to today, which is sad, but he's still a very good, dominant player. And then I have Khalil Mack as one of my edge players. He's a player that, he did play linebacker for a while and everything, but he's an edge player. So that's where I have Khalil Mack. At linebacker, Luke Kuechly. I would have loved to have seen where his career would have gone had he not retired. He was talk about just a generational talent, essentially. And then, this next one is kind of hard. I have actually. I got my list pulled up here. I don't think I picked okay. Yes, I did. I picked the right amount of players. I was worried there for a while there that I didn't pick the right amount. So my last 2 linebackers are Patrick Willis and Bobby Wagner. I know Patrick Willis. You're like, really? Patrick Willis? When he was able to play, that guy could lay
before he had his leg snapped in half. He was amazing.
Yeah. So I got Patrick Willis and Bobby Wagner are my last two linebackers. At corner, I have. This is going to be. I have Richard Sherman as my first corner, and I also have Chris Harris Jr. Both of these guys have played in the league for a while, and they're just exceptional talents. Chris Harris it's actually pretty amazing that he was an undrafted rookie. That is that's just outstanding as well. And then at safety, to round things out on defense, I have Eric Weddle and Earl Thomas. Both of these players have just been super solid for their teams. And Earl Thomas, I mean, he's one of the most, in my mind, he's one of the more underrated players in the NFL right now. And then on special teams, my kicker, I have Justin Tucker. He's been the most accurate kicker this past decade, but he is really rapidly closing in on being named as one of the best kickers in league history as far as accuracy goes. I mean, Adam Vinatieri, he's solid, but as the decade has gone on, his game has decreased significantly, whereas Justin Tucker just keeps going this decade. So Vinatieri can have the beginning half of the 2000s, whereas Justin Tucker owns the 2010s. And then punter, you have to go with Pat McAfee. There just hasn't been a punter as dominant as Pat McAfee. Pat McAfee could put the ball exactly where he wanted to put the ball, and then if you returned it and you broke through all the other tacklers, you weren't getting by Pat McAfee. I mean, Pat McAfee could, if you needed him to be a backup quarterback, he could be a backup quarterback. This is a guy that he played football. He was a football player. He wasn't some soccer player you brought in to kick the ball every now and again. This is a guy that he was a football player through and through. And I wish he would have kept playing, but you know what? He walked away when he walked away, and he was one of the best punters in the NFL. So that's how we're going to remember him. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, and you brought up some guys. You're like, oh wait, it's this guy, it's Patrick Willis, it's whoever. I mean, those are guys, Marshawn Lynch, Patrick Willis that I had on my honorable mentions as far as those are all close. I mean, all these guys that we're mentioning just transcended the game for the last decade. So excited to see who makes the list. And which of these guys perform well even onto this decade. But yeah, all great members of the list, and exciting to watch those players play. I mean, mentioning some of those players brought some great memories to my mind. So I definitely some great names on that list, and that will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Crash Course FM. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Crash Course Podcast. Like I said, this will be the last week that we will premiere live on Facebook. All the premieres in the future, when we come back in 2 weeks, will be on YouTube. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Then remember, you can hear the podcast every Tuesday at anchor.fm/Crash Course. And then wherever podcasts can be heard, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you can hear podcasts, you can listen to the show. Like I said, if you want to talk to us about Victor Oladipo or the races or the all-decade team, make sure to hit us up at anchor.fm/Crash Course. We'd love to hear from you. But until a couple of weeks from now, we'll be back with the preview for the baseball season, and then after that, the preview for the NBA season. We hope there's no hiccups in between now and then. But until then, have a good week, everybody.